Chris, we're here to talk to you about tomorrow's NHL Draft lottery. Obviously, the rules have been explained multiple times by multiple people. We've got a video coming up in a bit to explain them again. But the real issue for me, Chris, is when people talk about prospects, they rank them in simple numerical order. And in every chapter of life, I have become tired of numerical rankings because it doesn't give you an idea of the gap between the numbers, right? If you say something's 1 through 10, there's got to be a number 2, there's got to be a number 3, but the gap between number 1 and number 2 could be twice as big as the gap between number 3 and number 4. So I'll ask you this right off the top. Is it a straight 1 through 10 ranking, or are there tiers or orbits of prospects available in this draft?
You know, there's always tiers, and I think it's important to. I think that's always an important distinction. It's something that I try to do in my writing too, is just to kind of give a sample of where these guys stack up. But I mean, you look at this and you say, okay, well, Alexis Lafreniere, pretty clearly the consensus number one guy. There's certainly a few scouting services out there that have put a Quentin Byfield at 1, or sometimes you see a Tim Stützle at 2 and Byfield at 3. It just kind of depends. But I think that Lafreniere is heads above the pack at this point. I think he's the safest pick. He projects very favorably. He's got all the accolades. We've seen him at the World Junior level be dominant. We've seen him dominate at the junior level. He's probably the most NHL ready player in this draft as well. And then for me, there's a bit of a drop, and then it's Quentin Byfield. And I think he's such a high upside player where you're taking a bit of a risk because he still has a lot to grow his game. He's one of the youngest players in this draft as well, which I think actually improves his value because he's almost a full year younger than Lafreniere. So that's where I see that there's a bit of separation between him and the pack. And then you kind of go a little bit further, and then it's Tim Stützle, Lucas Raymond, Cole Perfetti, Marco Rossi. I mean, like that, those guys are kind of grouped together for me. But I think there are always going to be tiers. And for me, the tier, if you're in the lottery range, you're in a really good position to land a potential impact prospect. If you're beyond that, I think you're starting to get into that area where it's going to be tougher to make some of those decisions. You're going to have to rely very heavily on your board and just, everybody's going to have a different idea of who the best player available is. But I think if you're in that 1 through 10 range in particular, or 1 through 11 maybe, I think that's where you have a chance to make a huge splash in this draft.
You mentioned that Lafreniere has shown that he's clearly the I think you said the most NHL ready player available. What about his game makes him stand out so far above everyone else?
Well, I think there's a couple of different things. The one for me that makes him stand out above the rest is just his competitiveness, his ability to play the body, his physicality, his willingness to go to the hard areas of the ice. He initiates contact a lot. I think if you watch the World Juniors, you would see him really getting after the opposing defenseman on the forecheck and making it really difficult for them. I think that's something that can translate immediately to the NHL given his size and physical strength. He also has a really good feel for the offensive zone, his ability to kind of, work the puck around. And then, he's got that ability to get to the middle of the ice as well as about anybody in this class, just because he has some power to his game. He's not a behemoth by any means, but he uses his size extremely well. And he's got the work ethic and the skill level combination that I think translates most immediately.
The kids getting drafted are obviously, they're 17, 18, 19, depending on how it goes. You mentioned that Byfield's almost a year older than Lafreniere. Am I saying it right, by the way, Lafreniere?
Yep,
Okay.
Lafreniere, yep.
Hockey isn't completely reliant on body size or height or weight, but I could imagine that at that age, that can shift dramatically over a period of time. Does it matter that someone like Byfield is a larger specimen than Lafreniere? Is there any expectation that might shift, rapidly over time?
I think it matters because he's taller, he's heavier, he's as we mentioned, younger. So there's a chance for him to even become bigger and stronger. And he's also a very quick player. I mean, at that size, you have to still be able to play. I think that Lafreniere's skills are a little bit further ahead than where Byfield's are, but I still think that Byfield has very projectable traits in the skill department. But I think when you're looking at size, it can be a benefit. It doesn't necessarily make a huge difference in the evaluation. I think you're just looking to see, kind of where these players stack up. I think what matters more is probably the positional bias. where Byfield's a center and Lafreniere is a wing. So those are kind of the situations that you have, or the different things that you have to look at and reevaluate and just see, what do you value more? And I think that the size of Byfield is one of the things that makes him an especially attractive player, but I think it's the total package and the upside that kind of comes with a player of that size and athletic ability and just strength at such a young age. So there's a lot of different things that come into play, but certainly it can be a separating factor between two prospects when they're close.
Jesse and Chris, I've got a question here from the chat. Nav W3 asks, are there any sleepers in this draft, Chris, that you think aren't being talked about enough right now?
Oh, wow. Yeah. The sleepers. Well, this is kind of a weird draft because I feel like there are so many wide ranging opinions about different players that can kind of, slide in here and there. And everybody seems to have a kind of a different definition of a sleeper, and I think sleepers, guys that could provide value in the later rounds or the middle rounds. One guy that I've talked about quite a bit this year as a sleeper is Declan Carlisle, who's a defenseman at Merrimack College. And he is an interesting player. He's eligible, second year eligible for the draft. Didn't get a lot of love last year. Didn't necessarily deserve it, but we saw this year at Merrimack, he played top pairing minutes. He played against top competition. There are still some flaws in his game, but he's very good defensively. He keeps a good gap. Some good offensive ability. Made the Hockey East All Rookie team this year. I think the responsibility that he was given on a team that doesn't have a lot of depth and plays in a particularly difficult conference. I was really impressed with what I saw over a live viewing and some additional video viewings of him kind of standing out. So that's a mid-range, middle to late round pick that I think, that's the kind of guy that you would eventually have to pay more for as a potential college free agent. So those second and third year eligible guys that are in this draft, those are guys that I think could be really interesting in those later rounds, and you might be able to get some more bang for your buck in those late round picks.
It seems to be, I don't want to say common knowledge, but oft repeated phrase not to take a goalie in the first round. And yet every time I look at the top 10 rankings, there's that goalie. I'm blanking on his name at the moment, but I believe he's from Russia.
Yeah, Yaroslav Askarov.
That's the one. Thank you.
Yeah.
What's the ceiling on him? Like, could he go top 5? Is he that good?
I think he is. I think that it just kind of comes down to the fact that this is that top 10 has depth. It has really good forwards in particular. And so it just comes down to how much risk are you willing to take? There's always a level of risk with a goaltender. It's one of the hardest positions to project. Some teams have invested in goalie specific scouts that have kind of helped narrow that gap a little bit, but it is a difficult thing to do because it's such a mental position as well. So you throw in the Russian factor, the fact that he's also a right catch goalie, which makes him a bit of an oddity in that regard, because I think all time there's only been about 10% of the goalies that caught with their right hand, which is kind of typical of the population that is left-handed naturally. But still, it's just interesting. It's one of those things. But for me, I've been doing this, either covering prospects specifically or working in junior hockey for over 10 years. And there really hasn't been a goalie. A lot of people have said he's the best since Carey Price. I kind of buy into that because I've seen him at his very best. When he's at his best, it's hard for me to say that there's definitely no goalie better in this draft. And it's hard for me to say that even some of the skaters are better because I think he can change the game. And it's such a valuable position, which is why it's so you have to get that pick right. And if there is a team that ends up in the top 5 in the lottery, based on however the lottery shakes out, they're going to have a decision to make. Is it best player available? And it could be him for some teams. It very well could be. But I think, there's going to be kind of some hesitation just because of the goaltending factor, the fact that he is Russian, he is under contract at St. Petersburg, which is a place where, they could potentially extend him and you don't know how long you're going to have. So this is one draft where there's so much talent. I could see a team just kind of passing on the risk. But for me, he's one of the best I've seen. I saw Vasilevsky, I saw, recent Spencer Knight last year who went in the first round. I think that where Askarov is right now, I feel like he is better than those guys were at the same age. He's had some tough moments. The World Juniors, he didn't play very well. Didn't play very well in the under-18 Five Nations, but he essentially won Russia the Hlinka Gretzky Cup in the beginning of the year. He got them to the silver medal game, beating a much heavily favored USA team that had Jack Hughes and Trevor Zegras and Alex Turcotte and all those guys. and basically single-handedly beat the U.S. So when you see a player like that, and you see him at the top level, that's a kind of guy that I feel a little more comfortable taking the risk on, even though he is a goaltender.
Another question here.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, from chat. Aperture is asking, do you see any specific player possibly making a big jump? I don't know if you just answered it kind of right there with Yaroslav, because on Sportsnet he's listed as, number 12 in the rankings. Is that someone maybe you would consider making that big jump like you both were talking about, like cracking the top 5 or something like that if a team needed him? Or is there another player that you feel like could possibly make a big jump up like that?
It could be him. I think one of the other guys that's been getting a lot of buzz and was really before, we had to stop the season, is Jake Sanderson, defenseman from the U.S. national team program. It's been thought that Jamie Drysdale is the number 1 defenseman in this draft by a lot of people, and I had them back to back in my own rankings. So, and I had Drysdale just a little bit ahead, but I think Sanderson is starting to convince more people that he should be higher up. Now he's a better all-around defenseman, certainly better defensively. Both of them are great skaters, but Sanderson is a much more is a faster and more powerful skater. He's more physical, he's bigger, and stronger. So I mean, those are the types of things. He's a guy that has been talked about throughout the year. He kind of started the season in maybe like the low 20s range for a lot of people, and he's clearly a top 10 guy now. And very well, I know there are people that feel very strongly about him going even higher than that, and we could see him be one of those guys that sneaks into the first 6 picks or so ahead of some of these forwards that have been more highly regarded for a longer period of time. So he's a guy that I'm watching very closely as a potential riser to go even further higher than even I have him.
Well, Chris, we appreciate you joining us. After the draft lottery happens tomorrow at 5 p.m., moving forward, we're going to start taking a closer look at some of these prospects, getting into more in-depth scouting reports. So we may, in fact, be having you back on if you'll join us in the future.
Yeah, anytime. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Chris.